Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Muhammad Yunus. We have just 2 or 3 more things, and also we want to open it for any quick discussion or questions or comments. My younger brother, Yahya Abdurrahim, here is telling me what to do now. The next step, we have 2 things. So we will go with your request, Dr. Ahmed Elkadi, who was, by the way, probably 2 feet when I came to Panama City. Now I have to look up to him literally. Okay, 5 minutes because we have another poem and then we have some.
Thank you for the introduction. That was 3 people. I feel very honored to be a part of this day to commemorate Dr. Ahmed Elkadi. I have to say that I came to Panama City in '85 as a young youth, age 13, with my father, and I came to know Dr. Elkadi on a personal basis due to the close contact of my father with the type of work that they were doing together. As a youth coming here, there was not very many, aside from Sam, the one I can remember coming to Sunday classes in the Akbar Clinic. There was not very many, aside from, of course, Samir Elkadi, Man Elkadi. So we were a very small community. We got to experience things on a regular basis with Dr. Ahmed Elkadi and the community. I can tell you that Dr. Ahmed Elkadi was not the type who was a preacher at all. This is one of the very first things that caught my attention knowing Dr. Ahmed Elkadi is that he was more of a person who was hands-on. He was a person who his actions spoke louder than any words he spoke. And I don't think that very many of us would remember a lot of khutbahs or speeches. Yes, he gave us khutbah and Jum'ah, but I don't remember him as a preacher. I remember him mostly as someone who was a man of action. And this is something that caught my attention as a young youth here in Panama City. A youth who's looking for someone as a role model, or not necessarily an idol, but someone maybe as a role model or a teacher, not having a youth community in this small town. The lessons, I think what's important here is the lessons that should come about from this for our young youth who have not experienced Dr. Ahmed Elkadi. Was one thing he had instilled in us is never sacrifice. And people will think twice when they hear this, but the word sacrifice he taught us was not something that was in the Quran. The word that we really need to keep in mind is the word investment. And we need to be investing in our day of judgment. So when you sacrifice, when we say sacrifice towards those who need, the poor, the needy, this is not the correct word. You're investing to your future in the day of judgment. You are helping others for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Human nature is to help oneself. Love yourself. Invest in your own future. And this is something that can be very practical. So examples he was doing, loading his car or giving his car, taking away from his time, was for his sake. And this is something that he instilled in us. And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى تِجَارَةٍ تُنْجِيكُم مِّنْ عَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. He used the word tijara, O mankind, or he was addressing mankind. May I tell you a way to, or a trade that will save you from the hellfire. The word trade here was your investment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking us to be very wise with this. He also, the second thing that really caught my attention was his compassion for mankind, regardless of whether they're Muslims or non-Muslims. And in this he was sending a message to all mankind about Islam. As you know, Dr. Elkadi was involved in the Akbar Clinic, and a very large financial burden was on him. Yet at the same time, when patients came to his clinic to be treated, if they did not have any money, his policy was that these patients will be treated. And this is in the time, in the 80s, when Panama City was a very small town with very little resources, aside from the paper mill and the Air Force. Very little resources in this town, and people could not pay, yet they were treated equally with respect. And what's funny is that 20 years later, in my practice, I was examining a patient a young child who came with his grandfather. And on their very first visit, of course, they know us in the community as physicians and as Muslims. And his first question to me was, "Do you know Dr. Ahmed Elkadi?" And I stood and stopped, and I stopped examining the child, and I looked at him and I said, "Of course I know Ahmed Elkadi. Do you know Ahmed Elkadi, and how do you know him?" And he said that he was my doctor 20 years ago, and he's a great man, quote unquote. And I looked at him and I said, "Why do you say that?" And he says, I had no money when he was seeing me, yet he treated me with respect and honor at all times. This is from a non-Muslim. And this is the example that he was trying to send across, a message that people in this country would really appreciate. So this is an example that he was presenting the true light of Islam. The story that Brother Yunus mentioned about the brother who had stood up and asked for a car, and the story to our recollection is a little different, but a brother who was visiting from an outside town had stood up after prayer and asked for an investment, some amount of money, and a vehicle to start a business. And to most of the people in the community, it sounded like a hocus story. He was promising rewards that no one can achieve. But he was the first to help. He was the first to give away his vehicle and the first to help with money. When asked at the time, and when asked at the time, he said, "Well, I'm investing in the Day of Judgment. I'm helping this man." But he then realized that he would be taking away from this man's good deeds on the Day of Judgment, which he felt bad for afterwards, and he was asking about this man to see, where is this man? And at that time it came into light that he did give away his belongings. So it shows here his compassion, and it also shows his futuristic look, or his investment in the hereafter.